Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood walks off The Late Show after Stephen Colbert's relentless mockery crosses the line. What began as a standard promotional interview for Eastwood's new film spiraled into a tense standoff, leaving the audience stunned, and social media ablaze with reactions. The tension was palpable from the moment Clint Eastwood walked onto the set of The Late Show. At 94, the Hollywood icon moved with surprising vigor, acknowledging the standing ovation with a modest nod before taking his seat across from Stephen Colbert. The host's smile seemed forced, his posture stiff, telltale signs for regular viewers that something was off. "Welcome to the show, Mr. Eastwood," Colbert began, his tone lacking its usual warmth. "It's been quite some time since you've graced us with your presence, almost as if you've been avoiding us." Eastwood chuckled, clearly attempting to diffuse the tension. "Well, I've been busy. You know how it is in this business. Always another story to tell." "Yes, and speaking of stories," Colbert interjected, shuffling his note cards with unusual aggression. "Your new film, The Last Stand, deals with a retired ranger confronting his past. Seems like a theme you're familiar with." Retreading old ground. The audience's laughter was scattered, uncertain. Eastwood's expression hardened almost, imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "I suppose there are universal themes that resonate throughout life. This character faces regrets from choices made decades ago. I think that's something most people can relate to as they age." "Speaking of aging," Colbert pressed, ignoring the thoughtful response, "there's been some criticism about actors of your generation still headlining major films. Some say it's time to step aside for younger talent. Care to respond to that?" A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the typical Colbert banter. There was an edge to it that felt personal, almost vindictive. Eastwood shifted in his seat, his legendary cool demeanor intact but clearly tested. "I've always believed talent doesn't have an expiration date," Eastwood replied evenly. "Cinema should represent all experiences, all ages. There's value in stories told through the lens of someone who's lived nearly a century." "Yes, but don't you worry audiences might find it unrealistic?" Colbert pressed, leaning forward. "I mean, the action sequences, surely those required some creative editing and stunt doubles." The audience grew uncomfortably quiet. This was crossing a line, and everyone seemed to feel it except Colbert himself, who barreled forward with an almost manic energy. "I do my own stunts when appropriate," Eastwood responded, his voice dropping to that trademark gravelly whisper that had commanded attention for decades. "Always have. The film isn't about physical prowess. It's about moral courage. Something that transcends age." Colbert's smile tightened. "Moral courage. Interesting choice of words coming from you. Let's talk about your political views, shall we? They've certainly evolved over the years, or should I say, become more entrenched." The show's producer could be seen frantically signaling from offstage, but Colbert ignored him. This wasn't part of the agreed-upon interview topics, and the tension in the studio rose several notches. "Stephen," Eastwood said quietly, "I came here to discuss the film, not to have my politics dissected." "But isn't art political?" Colbert pressed, his voice rising slightly. "And doesn't the public deserve to know the values of the artists they support? Especially when those artists once lectured an empty chair on national television?" The reference to Eastwood's controversial 2012 Republican National Convention speech hung in the air like a challenge. Several audience members gasped audibly. This was no longer an interview, it was becoming an ambush. "That was 12 years ago," Eastwood responded, his patience visibly thinning. "And I'm not sure what it has to do with the film we're here to discuss." "Everything!" Colbert exclaimed with unexpected fervor. "It speaks to worldview, to judgment, to character. All things your new film supposedly explores. I'm just connecting the dots for our audience." Eastwood set his jaw, the steely gaze that had intimidated countless on-screen villains now fixed squarely on Colbert. I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've directed Oscar-winning films across 6 decades. I've worked with everyone from Sergio Leone to Meryl Streep. And in all that time, I've never encountered an interviewer so determined to make the conversation about himself rather than the work. The audience erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked murmurs. Colbert's face flushed, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. Well, perhaps if the work was more compelling, I wouldn't need to find more interesting topics, he fired back, discarding any pretense of professional courtesy. After all, isn't this just another grumpy old man seeks redemption story we've seen from you before? A production assistant approached the stage, likely preparing for a commercial break to defuse the situation, but Eastwood raised his hand slightly, stopping them in their tracks. The power of his presence was undeniable. Even in this hostile environment, he commanded respect. "You know, Stephen," Eastwood began, his voice now dangerously quiet, "throughout my career I've played characters who don't say much but observe carefully, who wait for the right moment to act. I've found that's effective both on screen and in life." "And what exactly are you observing right now?" Colbert challenged, an uncomfortable laugh escaping him. "A man who's forgotten that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn," Eastwood replied, each word measured and deliberate. "A man so caught up in scoring political points that he's willing to sacrifice basic civility. And frankly, a host who seems more interested in creating viral moments than having a genuine conversation." The studio fell completely silent. Colbert's smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a look of genuine shock. He hadn't expected Eastwood to fight back with such eloquence and restraint. "Well, Colbert began, but Eastwood wasn't finished. "You invited me here under the pretense of discussing a film that dozens of talented people worked on for years. Instead, you've chosen to ambush me with dated political references and ageist insinuations. I've faced tougher opponents than you, son, and I didn't survive in Hollywood this long by tolerating disrespect." With that, Eastwood slowly rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and dignified. The audience watched in stunned silence as he removed his microphone and placed it carefully on the desk between them. "For decades, I directed films about the consequences of unchecked ego and the importance of human dignity," he said, looking down at Colbert. "Maybe you should watch a few before your next interview." The cameras captured Colbert's expression, shifting from shock to panic, as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just an awkward moment. This was potentially career-damaging footage being broadcast live to millions. "Mr. Eastwood, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here," Colbert attempted, his voice losing its earlier confidence. "Perhaps, after the break we can—" "I think we're done here," Eastwood interrupted calmly, turning toward the exit. The studio audience, initially frozen in disbelief, began to stir. Someone shouted, "Respect!" from the back row, and suddenly scattered. Applause broke out, growing louder as Eastwood made his way toward the stage exit. Colbert stood up, visibly flustered. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after these messages," he announced hastily. But the cameras lingered on Eastwood's retreating figure, capturing a moment that would soon dominate every entertainment news cycle and social media platform across the country. As Eastwood reached the edge of the stage, he paused and turned back. The audience fell silent once more, anticipating his final words in this extraordinary confrontation that had veered so far from the typical late-night banter. What he would say next would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry and force a reckoning that nobody, least of all Stephen Colbert, had seen coming. "You know what the difference is between you and the characters I've played, Stephen?" Eastwood asked, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hushed studio. "Those characters, even the flawed ones, understood something about honor, about letting a man speak his piece without turning it into a circus." He gestured toward the audience. "These people didn't come to watch you take cheap shots. They came because they respect the work. Mine, yours, everyone who puts themselves out. There. But respect has to go both ways. Colbert, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, attempted to salvage the situation. "Mr. Eastwood, please," he began, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Don't Mr. Eastwood me now," the Hollywood icon cut him off. "You made your play. I'm making mine. 20 years ago I might have walked right up to you and settled this differently. But age does teach you something. It teaches you to choose your battles and to fight them with dignity." A woman in the front row stood up and began applauding. Within seconds, others followed, until nearly half the audience was on their feet. The show's director could be seen frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. "Cut to commercial!" Colbert hissed toward the production booth, his professional facade crumbling. But Eastwood wasn't finished. "I've sat across from Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, David Letterman. Hell, even Howard Stern showed more respect than you just did. You want to know why your ratings are slipping, Stephen? It's not because you lean left or right. It's because you forgot that a good conversation requires listening, not just waiting for your turn to land a punchline." The audience erupted in a mix of applause, gasps, and scattered shouts of support. Colbert's face had turned crimson, a vein visibly pulsing at his temple, as he realized the extent of the damage unfolding live on national television. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert attempted again, struggling to regain control, "we clearly have a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Eastwood interrupted, his voice steady. "You invited me here knowing exactly what you plan to do. I've been around long enough to recognize an ambush when I see one." He turned to the audience directly. "And for the record, The Last Stand opens next Friday. Judge the work for yourselves, not through the lens of whatever political agenda is being pushed here tonight." With that parting shot, Eastwood turned and walked off stage with the same measured dignity that had defined his 6-decade career. The camera caught a production assistant rushing to meet him, offering apologies that Eastwood waved away with a dismissive hand gesture. The control room finally managed to cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In the brief seconds before the broadcast switched to advertisements, viewers nationwide witnessed Stephen Colbert standing alone center stage, abandoning all pretense of his usual confident persona, looking utterly lost. When the show returned from the commercial break, Colbert was seated at his desk, his expression artificially composed, but his eyes betraying a mixture of anger and panic. The audience's energy had completely transformed, the usual enthusiastic approval replaced by a tense, expectant silence. "Well, that was certainly something," Colbert attempted, forcing a laugh that found no echo in the studio. "When Clint Eastwood agrees to an interview, you certainly get authentic Clint Eastwood." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience, but the tension remained palpable. Colbert pressed on, trying to pivot. "Our next guest tonight." "What about an apology?" a male voice called from the audience. The cameras swung wildly, searching for the source of the interruption, a middle-aged man in a business suit standing near the back row. "Excuse me?" Colbert replied, visibly taken aback by this unprecedented breach of talk show decorum. "An apology," the man repeated. "You just disrespected an American icon on national television. The least you could do is apologize." Security personnel began moving toward the audience member, but before they could reach him, another voice spoke up from a different section. "He's right. That was shameful." Colbert's producers were now in full crisis mode. The floor director made a slashing motion across his throat, cut the broadcast. But the network apparently decided to let the situation play out. "Look," Colbert said, struggling to maintain composure. "Interviews sometimes get heated. That's part of the process. Mr. Eastwood is certainly entitled to his opinions, as am I." "But it's your show," a woman interjected. "You're supposed to be the professional here." The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Half the audience appeared to be live streaming the meltdown on their phones, ensuring that even if the network cut the broadcast, the fallout would continue on social media. In the green room, Eastwood watched the chaos unfold on a monitor, his expression unreadable as the show's executive producer pleaded with him. "Mr. Eastwood, is there any way we could convince you to go back out there? Just to smooth things over? The network is in panic mode." Eastwood took a sip of water, regarding the producer with those legendary steel blue eyes. "Son, I've said what needed saying. The ball's in his court now." Back on stage, Colbert was attempting to regain control. Folks, please! This is still a television show, and we have other guests waiting." But the damage had been done. Social media was already exploding with hashtags like Eastwood walkout and Colbert cancelled. The video clip of Eastwood removing his microphone had already been viewed over 1 million times in the mere minutes since it had occurred. In the network's executive offices across town, phones were ringing off the hook as advertisers began calling, with concerns about being associated with what was rapidly becoming the most controversial late-night moment in recent television history. And as Stephen Colbert struggled through the remainder of his now derailed show, the audience's restlessness only grew. What had begun as an ordinary promotional interview had evolved into something much more significant, a pivotal moment that would force a national conversation about the boundaries of political discourse, the treatment of entertainment legends, and the responsibilities of those given platforms to shape public opinion. By midnight, the incident had gone beyond viral. It had become a cultural flashpoint. Every major news network had picked up the story, running the footage alongside panels of experts analyzing the confrontation from every conceivable angle. Entertainment reporters stood outside CBS headquarters, delivering breathless updates as network executives huddled in crisis meetings. In his Manhattan hotel suite, Clint Eastwood sat in quiet contemplation, his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. His publicist had already fielded calls from every major news outlet in the country, all clamoring for an exclusive interview. But Eastwood, true to form, had no interest in prolonging the drama. "No statements tonight," he told his publicist firmly. The footage speaks for itself. Across town, the situation was markedly different. Colbert was sequestered with a team of network executives, PR specialists, and his own production staff, frantically trying to craft a response that would minimize the damage. The early viewing numbers were catastrophic. His ratings had plummeted in real time as viewers turned away in disgust. "You have to apologize," insisted the network's head of programming, sliding a tablet displaying the trending social media reaction across the conference table. "Not a qualified apology. A real one." Colbert stared at the screen, scrolling through thousands of comments condemning his behavior. Even many of his longtime supporters were expressing disappointment. "I was just doing my job," he protested weakly, "asking the tough questions." "No," the executive replied firmly. "You were badgering a 94-year-old national treasure for cheap political points. And now we're all paying the price." By morning, the story had only grown. Breakfast television shows led with the confrontation, playing the clip on loop as commentators from across the political spectrum found rare common ground in criticizing Colbert's approach. "What we witnessed last night wasn't journalism or even entertainment," declared a prominent morning show host. "It was bullying, plain and simple." More damaging were the industry reactions. Actors, directors, and producers, many of whom had previously been Colbert's guests, began issuing statements supporting Eastwood and questioning whether they would appear on The Late Show in the future. "I've known Clint for 40 years, veteran director Martin Scorsese wrote in a widely shared social media post. "He's a consummate professional who deserves better than what we all witnessed last night. Artists should be able to discuss their work without being ambushed." By noon, CBS executives had made their decision. A press conference was hastily organized, and a visibly exhausted Colbert was trotted out to face the cameras. His usual sharp wit and confident demeanor were nowhere to be seen as he cleared his throat and addressed the waiting journalists. "I want to begin by offering an unreserved apology to Mr. Clint Eastwood," he said, his voice lacking its usual resonance. "Last night, I failed not only as a host but as a professional and as a person. What should have been a celebration of Mr. Eastwood's new film and his legendary career became something ugly and personal. That's on me." The press conference continued for 20 painful minutes, with Colbert fielding increasingly difficult questions about his interviewing style, his treatment of guests with differing political views, and whether the network had directed him to take such an aggressive approach. "The questions and the tone were entirely my responsibility," he insisted, rejecting the opportunity to shift blame. "CBS had nothing to do with it. This was my failure, and I'm here to own it." As Colbert spoke, across town, something unexpected was happening. Clint Eastwood, who had initially refused all interview requests, had agreed to appear on a rival network for a brief statement. Unlike the haggard Colbert, Eastwood appeared composed and dignified as he faced the cameras. When asked about the previous night's events, he surprised many with his measured response. "Look, we all have bad days," he said simply. "I've certainly had mine over the years. What happened was unfortunate, but I don't believe in dwelling on these things." When pressed about whether he accepted Colbert's apology, Eastwood nodded slowly. "I believe in second chances. Always have. A man should be judged by how he handles his mistakes, not just by making them." This unexpected grace from Eastwood shifted the narrative dramatically. By evening, the story was no longer solely about Colbert's failure but about Eastwood's remarkable class in response to it. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker, one appearing diminished by the controversy, the other somehow elevated. What nobody expected was what happened. Next, 3 days after the incident, as the media frenzy was finally beginning to subside, Colbert's opening monologue took an unprecedented turn. "Before we start tonight's show, I have something important to address," he began, his tone serious. "Many of you saw what happened with Mr. Clint Eastwood earlier this week. I've already apologized publicly, but that's not enough." The audience, still somewhat wary after witnessing the previous disaster, watched in surprise as Colbert continued. "I've spent my career behind this desk, behind the safety of writers and editing and audience support. Last night I spoke with Mr. Eastwood by phone and invited him to return to this show, not to smooth things over for the cameras, but because I believe I owe him and all of you something better than what you saw." A murmur ran through the audience as Colbert stood up from behind his desk, something he rarely did during his monologues. "Mr. Eastwood won't be joining us again, and I respect that decision completely. But our conversation reminded me of something important that I'd forgotten somewhere along the way. This job isn't about scoring points or making myself look clever at someone else's expense. It's about creating moments of connection, through humor, through conversation, through genuine curiosity about other people's lives and work." For the first time since the incident, Colbert's trademark wit returned as he added, "And occasionally through stupid sketches involving grown men in ridiculous costumes because, hey, it's still late-night television." The audience laughed, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth. What had begun as a catastrophic failure of professionalism had somehow transformed into something more nuanced, a moment of genuine reflection and growth playing out in the public eye. In Hollywood, watching the broadcast from his home, Clint Eastwood nodded slightly in approval. He'd been in the entertainment business long enough to recognize authentic transformation when he saw it. The incident that had threatened to end Colbert's career had instead forced a reset, not just for him personally, but for a late-night landscape that had grown increasingly partisan and divisive. In the weeks that followed, viewers noted a subtle but meaningful shift in Colbert's interviewing style. More listening, less performative outrage, a willingness to engage with diverse perspectives without immediately seeking to undermine them. The Late Show's ratings, which had plummeted immediately after the confrontation, gradually recovered and then, surprisingly, began to climb beyond their previous levels. Viewers who had tuned out years earlier, tired of the political monologues, found themselves drawn back by this evolved version of the show. As for Eastwood, The Last Stand opened to stronger-than-expected box office numbers, boosted by the publicity surrounding the confrontation. Critics praised his performance with a newfound appreciation for the resilience and dignity he had displayed both on and off screen. In an industry often criticized for its superficiality, the Colbert-Eastwood confrontation ultimately became something unexpected. A catalyst for authentic change, and a reminder that even in the most manufactured of environments, genuine human moments, both spectacular failures and graceful recoveries, still have the power to transcend the formula and touch something real.